Hey, how's it going, YouTube? Don here. In this video, we're going to talk about the tech layoffs and how to succeed and thrive during a recession. So, let's get right into it. So, if you've been living under a rock recently, in the past couple months or so, you've seen the headlines with a bunch of big companies that are doing layoffs, right? So, Meta's laid off 11,000 workers, Amazon has also laid off 10,000 workers. The crypto industry is basically imploding about itself. So, as a measly employee, it can be definitely very, very intimidating, and it can be very hard to navigate and be very uncertain on what the future of it. You might be asking yourselves questions like, is there still a future in tech? Is it still worth it for me to learn to code? Should I navigate and move to another industry, or perhaps pursue another career altogether? So those are the kind of concepts that I wanted to talk about in this video. And to start off, I think it really helps us to understand, how we got here and why it's happening. Because once you understand this stuff, it's going to be a lot easier for you to understand what's going on and to make rational decisions and to determine whether you want to code, continue to code, whether you want to move to a different industry, whether you want to gain another skill that might help along with your career. So let's go back in time to the COVID pandemic. So, as you know, during the COVID pandemic, the government wanted to prevent a recession by printing money, basically. So they were handing out checks like these stimulus checks. People were getting a flux of income, and then they were also not going out as much. So naturally, companies started, especially tech companies, started to benefit a lot from the COVID pandemic. Amazon saw a really big spike in the amount of people that were using their platform. People are at home, they were on social media platforms like Snapchat and Facebook and all that different type of stuff. So naturally, as a CEO, the tech CEO, they would see that their stock is trending up. So let's start hiring people very, very quickly, right? So a lot of these companies were growing really, really quickly during the COVID pandemic, right? Because they're anticipating a long period of growth and they weren't thinking about the future, right? It's like, is this sustainable? If you look at any stock in the past, then you're going to see that most big companies sustain growth over a long period of time, right? So that's something that was a blind spot of a lot of CEOs. Now, they might be thinking, oh, they're worth $100 billion, but at the core of it, a lot of these people are still emotional beings. We're all emotional beings at the forefront. So they see that they're making a lot more profit. So they want to capitalize on this. And now what you're seeing is the consequence of the action 2 years later, right? This was back in 2020. Now in 2022, we're seeing the consequences to these actions 2 years later. So what we're seeing here is a market adjustment, right? So what we're seeing here is all these big companies have overhired. They've hired based on market forecasts rather than on current demands, right? So another thing that you might notice is a lot of the companies that hired really, really quickly are the ones that are most subject to the layoffs, right? So you see Meta grows really, really quickly. I'm going to add a link in the description below so you can kind of take a look at a chart that shows that Meta was one of the greatest hires during just in general, right? They tend to hire really, really quickly, right? And then you have other companies like Twitter who also hire really, really quickly, especially during like 2020 portion of it, right? So naturally, they grow quickly. That means that they're more likely to have a market adjustment. It's very much similar to a penny stock, right? If you guys aren't familiar with penny stocks and the stock market and all that different type of stuff, I'm going to go over a brief overview of that. So penny stock is something that's worth less than a penny, And what they do a lot is they do what's called a pump and dump, right? So they pump up their stock with like good news on good quarters, and that really raises up the stock price, right? But since this is artificially pumped up, then ultimately there's a market, it goes down like really, really quickly, right? It's like a spike, right? So we're seeing the same thing with these tech companies. Is a lot of the companies that have hired really, really quickly are realizing they made a mistake and they need to lay off workers in order to adjust it. If you look at the chart in the description section below, you'll see a lot of the companies that hire consistently and don't have these hiring spikes. You'll never see them in the news on layoffs and whatnot, right? So in the description, there's the lowest one is Apple. Apple slowly grows over time. They never have these like hiring spikes or something like that. They just go and take their time and start growing up. And you never hear about mass layoffs at Apple because they're very slow and conceited about it, right? And that's really a sign of good leadership, is they're thinking very rationally. They're not thinking emotionally, which is another thing that you're seeing with a lot of these companies that are doing mass layoffs, is a lot of them are making decisions emotionally, right? So if you look at Meta, right? What happened is Apple implemented app tracking transparency, which basically cut off a large portion of their revenue. And what happened there is they started getting emotional about it. They're like, oh my God, we're losing all our revenue. What are we going to do now? Oh, I know, the metaverse, right? And this is a really, really, I saw it a mile away that Facebook was going to, lay off workers, because the metaverse, from having come from a background of business, doesn't really serve a purpose and a need that is much needed by society, right? You compare that to a company like Google, which obviously is still doing layoffs, but they're a conglomerate company, so they're going to do layoffs in different portions of it. So it's important not to take it too into context, right? So if Google serves a need to connect information all together, right? You Google something, you find websites about that, right? But metaverse, it doesn't really solve a need necessarily. They haven't really established what kind of problem that they're trying to solve here, right? So now that we have a little bit of background, and now that we can understand all of this rationally, what does it mean for you as a tech worker, right? So as a tech worker, what you need to do is you need to think rationally and understand that you need to keep applying to jobs consistently, right? If you're willfully employed and gainfully employed, you need to start putting out those applications, right? And you need to take a look at what skills are out there that are solving a need for something in society, right? So if you wanted to work let's give you an example so that it's very, very clear for you, right? Let's say your dream company is Google, right? I would go one level deeper and say, what is the core product of Google? And, what problem is this solving for people, right? So if I wanted to work at Google, me personally, I would take a look to see what the search team is looking for, right? Because this is the core product, and this is the one that solves the biggest need to consumers, right? And if you're working for a company that you believe that it's kind of like a little bit hypey, like the metaverse and crypto and NFTs, I would really encourage you to start taking a look to see what your skills are, and how you can pivot and navigate to something that's a little bit more stable. Because here's the thing, having come from the online business world, I've seen all the trends and stuff, and tech is definitely following the same trend as it was in the online marketing space. So my advice to you guys is to take a look and see which ones have had slow iterations over time, and which products have, been stable over the past 10 or so years, right? So, for example, let's just say that I wanted to, some industries that I would consider pretty good are things like banking and finance. The Goldman Sachs has been around for a long, long time. So I took a look to see what they got going on. Now they're still doing layoffs, but it's not as volatile as something like a Meta or Facebook. Another thing that I see is hydro utilities, because these things that are things that are still needed by society. So that's really the biggest advice from me to you guys here today in order to navigate the layoffs, right? I know a lot of it is, the CEO makes a bad decision. You as the employee are going to be the ones that are paying for it. And it definitely does suck. But at the end of the day, you only can control what you can control. And what you can control is the skills that you're going to build and the industries that you're going to go into. So at this point in time, what I recommend during economic, an economic uncertainty, I would really focus on building my skills in an industry that has been proven to be stable over time, right? That's the best way that you're going to ultimately recession proof yourself and really navigate yourself through these uncertain times. So if you guys enjoyed this video here today, I encourage you to give my video a like, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought about it, and of course to subscribe, as it really helps the channel out. It really helps reach people who are in need of content like this, who are really, are unsure about, the future of tech and all of that. So again, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.